All right, so this example is going to kind of be 4 to 5 different little parts that we're all going to break up, but it's going to cover every single thing that we've talked about as far as trade goes and getting all the way down to the Ricardian trade model. So we're just going to assume that the economies of the USA, which will be in blue, and Canada, which will be in red, are described by the table above. And then we want to know, very first thing is just will the USA and Canada trade? And then if so, who will export corn and who will export oil? So going up to this table, we have the amount of corn that the USA can produce in a year and the amount of oil that the USA can produce in a year, and then the amount of corn that Canada can produce in a year and the amount of oil that Canada can produce in a year. And again, remember, we're assuming a couple things. We're assuming first that the production functions, we're not dealing with production possibilities curves that are really curved out like this. And then the second thing is that we're assuming that only corn and oil are the only two goods that we need to worry about, just because that makes it simpler for the level of math that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and pause now. I want you to stop and try and work through just problem 1 on your own. And I want you to try and understand the why for this first part especially. I want you to be able to say why will the USA and Canada trade or why they won't trade. And then right after this, I'm going to pick up and start explaining it. All right, so when we're looking at whether nations will trade, we saw from the Ricardian trade model that nations will trade as long as the opportunity costs are not equal. So nations will trade. And another way of saying this is if they have a comparative advantage. If there exists a comparative advantage. And that's another way of saying that the opportunity costs, and I'm just going to write OC, are not equal. All right, so I'm going to go ahead just in the interest of space and go ahead and just back all of that up. I hope that that makes sense. If not, you should go back and review some of those other videos on opportunity cost and then comparative advantage. And so we're just going to go ahead and calculate the opportunity cost for the USA and for Canada for both corn and oil. So in the US, we have that in the US we can either produce 50 corn, or we can produce 25 units of oil. So let's say corn is measured in tons and oil is measured in a million barrels. So, sorry, and I forgot to say that this is for the USA. So if we just reduce that a little bit, then we get that 2 corn is equal to 1 oil. So in order to produce 1 unit of oil, the US has to give up 2 units of corn. And so now we're going to go do the exact same thing for Canada. And so I just want to underline that this is the important one right here. And we're going to have to play around with that a little bit more later on, but not for right now. So for Canada, we have 10 corn, and I'm going to pick a different color. We have 10 corn is equal to 30 oil. Or in other words, 1 corn is equal to 3 units of oil. So 1 ton of corn is equal to 3 million barrels of oil. So Canada has to sacrifice 3 million barrels of oil to produce 1 ton of corn. So just to make this really blatantly clear, for the US, I also want to go ahead and write out then that 1 unit of corn, 1 corn, would be equal to half a unit of oil, which would be like 500,000 barrels. So that was the other equation that I was saying that we were going to have to tweak this one a little bit to go on. And then I'm going to do the same thing for Canada. So for Canada, we can also say that a third a unit of corn, or a third a ton of corn, is equal to 1 million barrels of oil. So what we've gone ahead and done here is we've gone ahead and calculated the opportunity cost of corn and the opportunity cost of oil. So what I'm going to tell you now is that this one with the pink star here, this is the opportunity cost of oil, and then in purple, or we've already used purple a bunch, in orange, this one down here is the opportunity cost of corn. And those are both for the USA, obviously. And then over here, this one over here is the opportunity cost of oil for Canada. And then this one up here is the opportunity cost of corn for Canada. So what we can see now is that the USA, so before we go on to this actually, let's just stop and look. In order to produce 1 unit of oil, 1 million barrels of oil, the USA has to sacrifice 2 tons of corn. Where in Canada, in order to produce 1 million barrels of oil, they only have to sacrifice a third a unit of corn. They only have to sacrifice a third a ton of corn. So clearly Canada has the competitive advantage. So Canada, and I'm just going to write CA, has the competitive advantage. And I'm going to write this out because the abbreviation is the same as Canada, CA, has the competitive advantage in oil. And all that competitive advantage means is that it has the lower opportunity cost. And then likewise, the USA has the competitive advantage in the production of corn. And the way we can see that is for the US, we only have to sacrifice half a unit of oil. We have to sacrifice 500,000 barrels of oil to get 1 ton of corn. And in Canada, we have to sacrifice 3 million barrels of oil to get 1 ton of corn. So the US is better relative to Canada at producing corn, and Canada is better relative to the US at producing oil. So the answer to will they trade is a resounding yes, because the opportunity costs are not equal and each nation can specialize and both be better off for their specialization as long as they can trade. So then who will export corn? At this point, I hope that you can see that the USA is going to export corn because it has the competitive advantage in producing corn. And then we have that Canada will export oil because they have the competitive advantage in producing oil. So that's all that I really want to say about this first question. We've kind of gone ahead and laid the groundwork for the next 3 questions for all the rest of this. So if you didn't understand this, don't go on to the next video. Pause, go back, look over the other videos, the explanation videos, and then come back to this and have another crack at it, because you're definitely going to need to understand this. It's huge, and I think it's one of the most interesting things that you learn in a first semester economics course. And the idea of competitive advantage and opportunity cost really does take a while to sink in. It's not really clear right at the first minute, but it's what a ton of economics relies on. So I honestly think opportunity cost is one of the biggest things, one of the most important things you learn in the first semester of economics. So please, please, please make sure that you really get that down solid. So with that said, if you're all good on that, I will just see you in the next video.